I preached and quoted Acts 2:38, and there were people in there probably looking at me like I was crazy, but what you going to do? I'm just reading off the back wall, right? Isn't this something, though? Isn't this something for you and I to be thankful for? That our Christian heritage runs deep in this land. And I want to show you a quick timeline of events that led up to the first Thanksgiving that eventually took place in 1621. Those settlers, Jamestown to be exact, came over in 1606, settled it in 1607. First Thanksgiving, 1621. To then, of course, have Thanksgiving declared a national holiday by Abraham Lincoln in 1863, right? Coming up to the Civil War. But when the colonists arrived here, let's talk about this for a minute. They arrived here from England in 1606, 1607. They found that the Native Americans were already here. They also found the Spanish and the French were here. All the way from Canada down the Louisiana Purchase. That's where you have a lot of my culture, the Cajuns, the Acadians, the French from France, Napoleon. You have a lot of that was already here, even in the 1500s. You also had Spain in here. So you had Spanish colonies, you had French colonies, the Louisiana Purchase. You had all of this going on. And there was eventually peace between the tribes of the Wampanoag Indians and the colonists that came over here in the 1600s, and they found all of these beautiful Native American people. No, America did not start with 50 states. It all began with just 13 little old British colonies that settled that east coast of what is now the good old United States of America. But in the 1600s, they were just 13 forts set up by English Christian settlers who wanted to come to the New World and worship their God. Watch this. Pay attention. I'll be right back.
Hello. Let's get started on the lesson. There are 50 states in the United States of America. If you look at the American flag, you will see 50 stars, one for each state. But many years ago, there were only 13 stars. These stars represented the original 13 American colonies: New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Back in the early 1600s, English settlers came to America seeking independence from British rulers. They founded Virginia, the first American colony, in 1607. Settlers from many different nations, such as Sweden and France, continued to form colonies for many years. The 13th colony, Georgia, was founded in 1732. American colonies were divided into 3 regions: the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. Each region had a different way of life. The New England colonies were good for fishing and fur trading, but there was very little farmland. The Middle colonies were better for growing crops and raising farm animals. People in the southern colonies made money from cash crops, such as rice and cotton. Cash crops were grown for the purpose of selling. After the Revolutionary War, colonies started to become states. This would give them independence from Great Britain to start a new government. Let's review. Before there were 50 states, there were only 13 colonies in America. Colonies were founded by settlers in the 1600s and 1700s. American colonies were divided into 3 regions: New England, Middle, and Southern. Each region had a different way of life. The 13 colonies became states after the Revolutionary War, gaining independence from Great Britain. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Now, isn't it beautiful how each of these colonies were experienced in different ways of life? You know, versus the New England versus the Southern. You got you have farmers, but they worked together. And those originally 13 colonies, those 3 groups of colonies, they worked to help each other where they were weak. I'm strong when you're weak. You're weak where I'm strong, vice versa. So they began to lean on one another's skills and their goods and their trade. That is what America was founded on. Not communism, but colonies with freedom of trade and culture. We need to get back to some of that way of life, and I think we are. And this was all again done under started under King James of England, but things were different and began to change, especially under King George III later in the mid-1700s. Get into that. I want to make a little here. I don't want to get in trouble. I know that there were colonists that came over here and had fights and problems with the Indians. But if you go look at the Wampanoag Indians and the Powhatan and everything, I know there was problems, but these people celebrated the first Thanksgiving together, as I'm going to show you. They taught us how to farm the land. And even during the Revolutionary War, when the colonists were getting out of contract and covenant with the King of England, the Indians fought on the side of the colonists. They helped us get free from the British. And, you know, that's because, again, first of all, you get King James. Now you come along, you got King George coming, things start changing. The way that they didn't want to let us go. It reminds me of the Bible verse that says there arose a generation in Egypt that knew not Joseph. The Egyptians forgot how God used a Jew named Joseph to spare them with his dream interpretation. And Pharaoh was helped greatly, and he promoted Joseph. But then comes a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and the Pharaoh that rose began persecuting the Jewish people, much like King George III. He didn't want to allow the colonists to be completely free from his taxation or from the Church of England. This is what it was all about. Regardless what, it's all in your history. Go back, get it. You need to learn this, teach it to your kids, because they're scrubbing it from what's being taught nowadays. So we've established this. The first colonists came to Jamestown in about 1606, settled it in 1607. Now let's jump ahead to the Pilgrims. I just want you to see the timeline. You know my teaching. I'm very big on letting people know when this happened in the skew of things. So you got early settlers, 1607. Let's jump ahead to the Mayflower Compact that took place in about 1620 as more colonies were formed, up to 13, of course. And these separatists they were seeking to leave the Anglican Church because they wanted to worship Jesus in a new, more free world. That's why they came here. So please pay attention. This is another just short little video. I'll give you a little break from me, but I give you the Pilgrims' conquest of the 1620s.
The year was 1620, and a boat of people calling themselves separatists, more famously today called the Pilgrims, landed in present-day Massachusetts. It's a story we think we all know by heart, but it may surprise you to know that your repertoire of knowledge is missing a few key details, like the fact that less than half the people on the Mayflower were actually pilgrims, or that religious freedom wasn't their only motivation for sailing to the New World. Nevertheless, their journey, and subsequent writing of the famous Mayflower Compact, has staked a major spot in American history. Their story is one of hardship and preservation, ideals that inspired countless other early settlers and left a significant mark on the minds of the American people. In the years prior to 1620, a group of people had grown increasingly frustrated with the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. These people, who began to call themselves separatists because they wanted to separate from the Anglican Church to worship in their own way, began to face religious persecution in England. They tried to worship in secret, but that was no way to live. I know what you're thinking. This is when the Pilgrims came to America. Not quite. Actually, they fled to the Netherlands, hoping to establish a new life there. They settled in Leiden, Holland for several years, but still weren't happy. Their main goal was to establish a home where they could live their lives as Englishmen and worship their religion in their own way. They weren't interested in assimilating to Dutch life. Their children were starting to speak Dutch and abandon their English way of life. The separatists wanted to have a home of their own. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the New World was just what the Pilgrims were looking for. Arranging the trip wasn't easy, but on September 6, 1620, a boat called the Mayflower set sail from Plymouth, England with 102 passengers who were looking to start a new life. Only about 40 of them were pilgrims. 66 days later, they spotted land in present-day Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and while that is where they eventually set up Plymouth Colony, it isn't where they intended to sail. Originally, they had signed a contract with the famous Virginia Company to settle north of Jamestown and possibly near the Hudson River. Treacherous storms and seas made the journey south too difficult, so they turned back and went ashore near Cape Cod. Plan A, a settlement near the Hudson River under the control of the Virginia Company, had failed, and Plan B, a settlement in Massachusetts, was about to face its first test. Passengers on the Mayflower began to argue amongst themselves about how their new settlement would be governed. They had expected to follow the rules of the Virginia Company, but that ship had sailed, and the passengers had questions. What were the laws? Who was in charge? How would decisions be made? Thanks to the journal of William Bradford, a Pilgrim leader on board the Mayflower who would later become a governor of Plymouth Colony, we know that 41 adult male colonists signed a famous document known as the Mayflower Compact on November 11, 1620. They vowed to, solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. Essentially, they promised to remain loyal to King James of England, uphold their Christian faith, and work together to create a self-governing society. This means that the adult men agreed to elect their own leaders to govern the colony. It didn't mean they were declaring their independence from England. That wouldn't happen for another 156 years. After signing the Mayflower Compact, they promptly elected John Carver to be governor of their new colony. The entirety of the Mayflower Compact was short, only about 200 words long, but it had a profound impact on history. It established self-government for the English in Plymouth Colony, and was a stepping stone to the democratic government that would later be formed in America. The decision over governments had been settled, but that soon became the least of their problems.
And that is because the colonists who started settling the east coast of America were hit by an attack from the British, who wanted to tax them and keep control of those 13 British colonies. And they also, of course, as you heard there, wanted to control what and how they worshiped their God. And this brings us to the Revolutionary War and the birth of the nation as we jump ahead now from 1607. There you saw 1620. I'm going to jump ahead and we're going to come back for Thanksgiving, but we're going to jump ahead to the mid 1700s and what would be called the Revolutionary War and George Washington and his angel. Now, I love George Washington. George Washington, as you see in this famous picture here, was a man of prayer, and he claimed to have been visited by an angel at Valley Forge. This vision was posted in the National Tribune in 1859. It was disclosed to an officer named Anthony Sherman, and it is published in the National Library of Congress. Yes, George Washington's dreams, visions of this lady coming to him with American flag and sword and prophecies about this nation, calling him the son of the republic. George Washington was in Virginia praying, receiving dreams and prophecies while he was pointing his musket and being shot at. The fate of this land hung upon a man who would obey what God told him through a messenger, which all of these things I'm telling you are documented in the records of this nation. Washington was warned in that vision by an angel he described as a female like Lady Liberty, who told him of these three perils that would befall our nation. The first peril was happening at the time of the vision. So that was very obvious what was happening. They were going into the Revolutionary War. They were in a time where they were getting ready to succeed and break off from the British. The second peril was believed, and I believe it to be what was described as a coming civil war in about 1865. And that was shown to George Washington by this angel who tore a flag in half. She tore that flag representing that the nation was going to be split, a civil war, brother against brother. Then this angel tells George Washington about a third peril. The third peril was a dark red cloud from Asia and Europe. Sound like communism to me. Overtaking America. All possible scenarios of America's final fate at the hands of globalism. God showed it all to the first president, a man who made a covenant with God, between God and this nation, between this nation and our creator. George Washington made, proving, this is all documented. When people say, oh, we're not a Christian nation. Well, no, everybody's not. You know, sure, everybody's not. There are a lot of Masons that come over here in that. Every Mason isn't a bad person, no more than every Pentecostal is a good person. You know, God's going to judge us not because what group, what year were you born? No. This just proves that God was with our ancestors. Brothers and sisters, please hear me on this Thanksgiving night. God was with them in those early 1600s as they fought for this land called America, the free and the brave, the one nation under God. Now, watch how George Washington, Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, all others, and I really was in Boston and had such a great time taking these tours. But those men rose up with others and they fought a spiritual battle. Listen, George Washington wasn't having visions sent to him by angels and people appearing to him and telling him what was going to happen before it happened. He didn't have that happen because he was in just a physical battle or it was a political war. These men rose up and fought a spiritual battle as well as a religious and a political war in the physical realm, but they were more so fighting in a prayer realm. George Washington, a man of constant and consistent prayer. Watch this. Pay very close attention to the dates and the numbers that are documented in these wars and the document signings. Please watch the dates, watch the numbers that are going to come up. You're going to see a lot of interesting and prophetic patterns associated with the fight for this country as we begin to go against the British Empire. Hey, the British are coming. The British are coming.
The American Revolutionary War, also called the American Revolution, was initiated by 13 North American colonies of Great Britain against the kingdom over their opposition. War broke out on April 19, 1775, when the British confronted colonial rebels in Lexington, Massachusetts. It was initially a conflict between Britain and its colonies, until France joined as America's ally in the National War. What triggered the American Revolution? Before the flare-up of the American Revolutionary War, there had been growing tensions and conflicts between the British Crown and its colonies. To raise the revenue from colonies, the mother country took many measures. The Sugar Act of 1764 aimed at ending the smuggling trade in sugar and molasses from the French and Dutch West Indies. The Stamp Act in the following year was the first British parliamentary attempt to raise revenue through direct taxation of all colonial commercial and legal papers, newspapers, pamphlets, cards, almanacs, and dice. The Townshend Acts in 2 years after that were a series of 4 acts in an attempt to exert authority over the American colonies. And the Tea Act was introduced 6 years later to save the East India Company, a key part of the British economy. These acts provoked great anger among many colonists. They resented the taxes, insisting that only their colonial assemblies could impose taxes on the people, and consequently, a rally was held behind the slogan, "No taxation without representation." Tensions and skirmishes ran high through many events, namely the Boston Massacre, the burning of the Gaspee and Rhode Island, and especially the 1773 Boston Tea Party, which provoked a crackdown by the British Parliament, including closing Boston Harbor and passing some acts to restore order in Massachusetts. In response to this, in September 1774, many colonial leaders, including George Washington of Virginia, John and Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, Patrick Henry of Virginia, and John Jay of New York, gathered in Philadelphia to discuss the colony's opposition to British rule. But the First Continental Congress's attempt to demand independence from Britain did not go so far. Tensions flared up on the night of April 18, 1775, when British troops marched to Concord, Massachusetts to seize an arms cache. It is the shot heard round the world in the battles of Lexington and Concord on the next day that kicked off the American Revolutionary War. Declaration of Independence. In June 1775, Continental Army, with General George Washington as its commander, was formed in the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. That same month, American troops were defeated by the British at the Battle of Bunker Hill in Massachusetts. This battle, on one hand, inflicted heavy casualties on the Crown troops, but on the other hand, it prepared the ground and boosted the confidence of the inexperienced Americans in the upcoming battles against the enemy. Throughout that fall and winter, the war went badly for the Americans, as they were outnumbered and outpowered by the British forces. However, in late winter, the balance of the fight was shifted when British artillery was captured at Fort Ticonderoga in New York. In March 1776, the British, led by General William Howe, the commander-in-chief of the British Army, retreated to Canada to prepare for a major invasion of New York. 1 year after the beginning, the Revolutionary War was at full scale, and by June 1776, many colonists demanded independence from Britain. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted a Declaration of Independence written mainly by Thomas Jefferson. That same month, a large British fleet was sent to New York with the aim to crush the rebellion. 2 months later, routed by Howe's redcoats on Long Island, Washington's troops were forced to evacuate from New York City. However, the surprise attack in Trenton and the battle near Princeton, New Jersey, after that, marked another small victory for the Colonials and revived the flagging hopes of the rebels. Battle of Saratoga, the turning point. Aiming at separating the most rebellious groups in New England from the other colonies, the British came up with a strategy involving two main prongs of attack. One led by General John Burgoyne, marching south from Canada, planned to meet the other led by Howe on the Hudson River. In July, in an attempt to retake Fort Ticonderoga, Burgoyne's troops suffered a devastating loss to the Americans, while Howe troops moved southward from New York to confront Washington's army near the Chesapeake Bay. On September 11th, the Americans were defeated at Brandywine Creek, Pennsylvania, and 14 days after that, the British entered Philadelphia. On October 4th, Washington struck back at Germantown, Maryland, but was compelled to withdraw to winter quarters at Valley Forge. In the north, the story was different. After being defeated by American forces in the first battle at Freeman's Farm, New York, and the second one at Bemis Heights, New York, General Burgoyne and his men were forced to surrender on October 17th. The American victory in Saratoga was considered the turning point of the war, as it involved France, which had been secretly aiding Americans since 1776, but was reluctant to declare itself openly as an ally. The American Revolution first sparked as a civil conflict between Britain and its colonies, then became an international war. Stalemate in the North, battle in the South. Following the American victory in Saratoga, New York, France and America signed treaties of alliance on February 6, 1778, in which France provided America with troops and warships. During the winter at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, Washington's forces received training and discipline from France. On June 28, 1778, when withdrawing from Philadelphia, Henry Clinton, who replaced Howe to take over the British forces, and his troops were attacked by Washington's army near Monmouth, New Jersey. This battle ended in a draw, letting Clinton's army get to New York safely. As the joint attack against the British in late July failed, France and America besieged Newport, Rhode Island. The war was locked in a stalemate phase in the north. In the South, Georgia and Charleston, South Carolina were occupied by the British in early 1779 and May 1780, respectively. Under the command of Lord Charles Cornwallis, British forces launched an offensive that defeated the Americans at Camden in mid-August. Later, on October 7th, American troops led by Isaac Shelby and John Sevier defeated Major Patrick Ferguson and one-third of General Cornwallis's army at Kings Mountain. In early 1781, General Daniel Morgan routed the British at Cowpens, South Carolina, marking America's victory on January 17th. The end of the colonial era in the U.S. The last major battle of the American Revolutionary War took place at Yorktown, Virginia in 1781. Washington and French commander Rochambeau teamed up to prepare for an attack against Clinton's forces with a total of around 14,000 soldiers and 36 French warships. Being surrounded and outpowered on land and sea by the Americans and French, Cornwallis and his entire army were forced to surrender on October 19, 1981. Following the battle at Yorktown and Cornwallis's surrender, the British still had its men stationed in some areas until the removal of their troops from Charleston and Savannah in late 1782. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Paris on September 3, 1783, by which Britain recognized American independence. Why the Revolutionary War matters. The Revolutionary War was considered an exemplary event in the history of the world, through which the United States of America came into existence and became the first country to drive out the hereditary monarchy and establish democracy. On top of that, the War of American Independence can be said to open a new era in the New World and pave the way for a new epoch for the Old World.
Wow. Same old, same old. Taxes, inflation, control, suppression, censorship of a people's God-given right to assemble and worship without any government interference. Same old thing. Now I want to end with going back to 1621 after we've got some colonies and we've got Jamestown, and now we've got these colonies moving north, creating what's called New England and New York, and they established a Christian holiday as they began to thank God for their crops and showing peace between the early settlers and our Native American brothers and sisters. And in doing so, in 1621, they had a get together, a shindig, as we would call it, a praise service of sorts where they lifted up one another in courage and they prayed and gave thanks to the God of heaven. Check out History of the Holidays, the history of Thanksgiving, all the way up to current action in the NFL.
To most Americans, the Pilgrims of Plymouth, Massachusetts are the iconic inspiration for today's Thanksgiving feast. After the winter of 1620 killed almost half of their people, the colonists formed a relationship with the neighboring Wampanoag tribe, who taught them about fishing, planting, and hunting. By autumn of 1621, the colonists had collected enough food to feed the community through the coming winter. The Wampanoags joined the colonists for a 3-day feast in honor of their bounty. The feast probably did not include our modern Thanksgiving staple, turkey. More likely, the colonists and Wampanoags dined on roast goose, along with corn, codfish, and lobster. This 1621 harvest meal is now commonly thought of as the first Thanksgiving. Yet for later generations of colonists, New England days of Thanksgiving had little to do with the 1621 harvest festival. Theirs was a religious holiday, descended from Puritan days of fasting, prayer, and giving thanks to God. Every autumn, the governor of each colony would declare days of thanksgiving for bountiful harvests, victorious battles, or drought-ending rains. In 1777, the Continental Congress decreed that all 13 of America's colonies celebrate a national day of Thanksgiving that year in celebration of their victory over the British at Saratoga. By the mid-19th century, many states celebrated the holiday. However, the date could vary by weeks or even months. A determined magazine editor named Sarah Josepha Hale set about establishing a national Thanksgiving Day. She passionately believed that such a day would help unite a nation headed towards civil war. Hale began a one-woman letter-writing campaign, urging politicians to establish an annual day of Thanksgiving. Her efforts were finally rewarded by Abraham Lincoln, who saw the unifying potential of the holiday. In 1863, 4 months after the victory at Gettysburg, he declared the last Thursday of November to be Thanksgiving Day. By the 20th century, Thanksgiving was a welcome day of leisure from a 6-day work week. In the 1920s, the National Football League was formed. In an effort to boost attendance, the fledgling Detroit Lions devised the concept of a Thanksgiving Day game. Parades also became a Turkey Day tradition, and department stores quickly saw their value as a kickoff to the Christmas shopping season. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade began in 1924, and year after year, millions of New Yorkers braved the cold to watch the festivities. Most of all, Thanksgiving is about family. With modern life moving faster than ever, Thanksgiving gives us a day to take a collective breath, reconnect with loved ones, and remember just how much we have to be thankful for.
Here's the turkey.
I love it. I love Thanksgiving. I love you. I love my family. It's Americana, everything you see there. We need this time together. We need this time as a nation. I think God give us Sabbaths for a reason. And it wasn't just the seventh day of the week always. It was the seventh year and the 50-year Jubilee. There were times of rest. And tonight, I want to thank God for all those little times of rest that he gives us. You know, when you've just been fighting, you're going, whatever, and you just get to sit down and eat some turkey. And listen, you know, I give up the majority of professional sports, but I watch a little bit of football today. I mean, hey, any day I could watch the Dallas Cowboys get beat would be a good day. No, I'm not into that like I used to be. I used to really be into that. But listen, it doesn't hurt. Sit down, watch a football game, eat some turkey, tell a joke. I think that's what the first Thanksgiving was about. Thank God we may not be where we want to be, but we're not how we used to be. And it took thousands of years and thousands of ancestors throughout all of time to bring us to those 13 colonies. And then again, there, they forged their way through. They fought. They bled. I can't wait to show you about the Battle of the Wilderness that I videoed and did some documentaries on when I was up in Fredericksburg, Virginia. The Battle of the Wilderness, where the woods were on fire. And God quickened me as I was down in the trenches. I got down in the trenches that were dug there hundreds of years ago. I got in there and I began to think about how the trees, they were shot. You could tell they were just writhed up and gnarled up from the muskets fire, and many men burned up in Plank Road, the battle on Plank Road. And I thought how over 100 years ago there was terror and bloodshed, mothers losing their sons on the battlefield, wives losing their husbands. And then I stood there on that day a couple weeks ago, or a few days ago rather, and it was peace and calm. You never know how quick God can turn your wilderness into a wonderful place. You got to fight the battle. Listen, we're so thankful for you tonight. I'm so glad to have had Lisa joining me. We're fixing to eat some more turkey around here. I got Carlisa up there in Studio A. They're cheering us on. We love you. I am so thankful for God. He's given me a ministry that I begin to be more appreciative of now. I can't wait to see you on the evangelist field. But right now, I'm spending a few days at home, and I'm going to get away, and I'm going to come back and be home. And we're in the process of having to get a new vehicle because I got about 245,000 miles on my GMC, and it's trying to lay down on me. We got it out of the shop today. We're trying to get some things fixed just to get it where I can get where I got to go so I can get back home and get me something else. I'm asking you to pray. I'm asking you to pray. God speaks to your heart. You want to give. You want to help us. We've got to keep this thing going, and that's one thing. But if I don't have some wheels under me, I can't travel. My ministry is much more than just here on Thursday. It's a lot of seat time, driving time behind the wheel. And I want you to pray. If God speaks to you to help us, Derek's going to put some things up through the Cash App, the whatever you want to do, you go do it and help us. I really don't want to have to borrow money and get bogged down in a big note, but here's where we are. Now, I have a little treat for you tonight. We have a little bonus as we're getting ready to close out. And I hope you enjoyed this little history lesson of our apostolic, Pentecostal, Jesus name roots in the founding of this nation and those 13 colonies in the 1600s, all the way to present day. We're still here. My little surprise tonight is a dream that I had that took a 4-year delay. Man, was I fought? What did people reveal their true colors to me during this time? If I had have been wrong, I see what people would have done. But turned out, I'm proud to say I was not wrong, and God's never wrong. But 4 years later, here we are. I'm going to give you a movie version from my 2020 Air Force One dream that I had weeks before the 2020 election. I want you to pay attention to some key words and listen carefully to what I say about Pence. There was something about him that was off in that dream. And also pay attention to me saying it was the will of God. Trump would go in as a second term, not back to back, but a second term. But they were trying to steal it, and they would steal it if we did not pray. but it would be a landslide covered up, but eventually we would win. So I want you to enjoy it. I want you to share this with non-believers. We worked really hard on getting this kind of in a movie form. So tell them this is a Holy Ghost channel, and we lift up Jesus with our prophecies. So people sometimes hear that stuff and they come to the Lord and come to our meetings. Say, I heard this and knew it had to be God. So God works in many, many little nuances to bring people to the saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. Acts 2:38, baptism in the name of Jesus, the infilling of the Holy Ghost with the evidence of speaking in other tongues. And if you don't have it, we want you to have it. Those early settlers, some of them had it. And so here we are still settling, we have it. Please think about going and giving tonight. You'll help us out here with the broadcast and everything we do and the people we pay to make this work. And our ministry is moving ahead to get another vehicle. So you can go purchase your book here on the website. Do it. I just signed one. I'll have Lisa send this out. Whoever really comes through and helps us tonight, if you'll come help us real big, maybe you already have one, but I signed this one. Use it as a stocking stuffer. Give it to somebody. I'm going to give this special book. I'm praying, believing that God is going to open up your understanding, or whoever you may give it to. If you'll go and give and help us tonight, I'm going to send this to a special person. On behalf of me, Lisa and Carlisa, we love you guys so very much. So don't forget to sow and give. And it's how we keep the lights on and these programs coming to you. I will see you next Thursday with my special guest, Brother Amante Porter. Check out the Air Force One Dream, and don't forget to go and give. I love you. Happy Thanksgiving.
I was flying on Air Force One. Those of you that don't know, Air Force One is the president's airplane. I was seated in a seat in the cockpit, but I was on the back wall. I wasn't flying the plane, but I could tell who was. I was sitting behind the co-pilot, who was Vice President Mike Pence, and in the driver's seat, or in the captain's seat, was President Trump. I was strapped in a seatbelt sitting on the back wall. There was like a door here, and there was a good bit of distance, but I am watching. This door that was here was open. It was not a shut door. It was open, and the plane was full. I mean, it was full, and these people on the plane, they had like streamers. They had like party hats on. They were very festive, but it was clean. It was not like rowdy. This is why I liken it to be unto like, conservative Christian type people. Just, there again, I'm not trying to interpret. I'm trying to tell you, I wasn't hearing cussing. I wasn't seeing profanity, but these people were on board the plane, and the plane was approaching the landing, and I could see through the front windshield, and it was storming. It was black. It was, we were going through flashes of lightning and rain, and we were descending, and as we were making the descent, we began to land. The control tower come up on the radio from the tower who was navigating us into land. Control tower came up in the cockpit and ordered the plane to abort the landing. They said, abort the landing, do not land, do not bring the plane down, do not come in at this time. The president was going down. We were already descending, like the landing gear was down. He kept going down, and he was kind of struggling. And I don't know everything that they were saying. I'm going to tell you some things I heard them say, but I could see they were looking like, don't land. We have to land. We're scheduled to land. And the control tower kept, coming back at them combatively, calling out the flight. Air Force One, do not land. Abort the landing. Abort. Do not attempt to land this time. So we come down, and it was storming so much until it was kind of like they were saying, we got to get this thing landed while we can, but they kept telling us not to do it. So when he comes down, the wheels touch. If you've landed, that feeling. It landed. We landed, and I felt the shaking. I could see them shaking. People in the whole plane are shaking. But as it landed, they kept screaming, Air Force One, do not land. Do not. You cannot land this time. They were screaming at him. So he gives it the throttle. He's like, he abruptly, we touch down, we land, and we pick up, and we come back up out of the runway. So we kind of do this little bounce landing, and then he like lifts us back up, and we go right back up into the air again. And, you know, you can hear a panic on everybody. There's a huge panic all through the plane. Not that people were screaming, but everybody's like, you know, you can hear these gulps of air. What are we doing? There's chatter everywhere. However, this time, the president and the vice president they're relatively calm, but they're looking at each other. They're having a conversation, kind of one of those eye contact things, like, can you believe this? Can you believe it? And so the plane comes up. We take a hard right, and we began to bear off right up into the sky, like to turn. And the tower comes back to us and says, Air Force One, you'll have to abandon the landing of Air Force One until the weather clears up. Pence gets on, you know, communicating with him. He gets on the radio with the control tower, and he begins to tell them, he says, Control, we do not have enough fuel to wait because this is a big storm. We can't wait. They said, you must keep in the flight pattern until we tell you that you can land. So then I can hear Trump verbally saying, come on, you got to be kidding me. What, you know, like they was almost saying we should have just landed then when we could have. And Pence is speaking back to the control tower. He's telling them, we don't have enough fuel. We can't do that. They kept telling us, keeping a holding pattern, keeping a holding pattern. So Trump and Pence, they're having this communication with each other. They made a decision that they were going to go in this circle, like to come back around and land the plane anyway. He said, we got to land. They're like, we got to land. Said, you know, forget that. We got to land. And so the order comes back again to everybody, prepare for re-entry. We're going to land again. This time we're going to do it. So we're still bearing out. We're coming around. As we're coming around, when we're lined up to make the second attempt at the landing, the tower again radios in and says for us to withdraw from the landing, do not land, and because that they said there's a plane that's ahead of us. And when they said there's a plane ahead of us, I could tell that Trump and Pence looked very worried. They looked at us like a plane ahead of us. They got very upset, and they were talking back and forth. And as they were talking, I could see the plane that was ahead of us that was going to land, and on each wing of it, it said Biden and Harris. It said Biden and it said Harris, and they were trying to. The tower was trying to let them land in front of us, and so now, you know, we come down, touch off, come back around. They're telling us you got to wait. And as we're coming back down, they said, you cannot, there is another flight landing in front of you. Well, we thought, you know, and I remember thinking what they told you, don't land because the weather. Now you're letting this other plane land, and you're letting them land in front of it. And I could tell, and Trump's face was red. Pence was very shook, but he's a calmer person. But I mean, they were just could not believe what just happened. And I'm watching this plane going in front of us, and I see on the wing, it says Biden, it says Harris, and they're letting them land. And when this began to happen, Trump shoved whatever the power is, but he shoved that handle down, and he just took off. We just took off. And again, you can hear everybody in the plane kind of like, whoa, and we're shoved back on our heels. And he shoves us ahead, and as we're coming in, I can hear, I remember Trump telling Pence, he said, we're not going to let them cheat this landing. We're not going to let them cheat. He said, now, he said, they're letting them cheat. And as he's saying that, we're rushing to it. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, are we going to be able to land it? And so they're hollering at the plane, abort, abort, abort. There's another plane in front of you. And so there's chaos, of course. And Air Force One continues. We continue moving in. Everybody now, there's fright inside the place. Everybody's screaming. And you know, I know that Pence is kind of looking at Trump nervously like, hey, wait a minute. Don't do this. You're going to kill us. You know, you're going to run this flight. We're going to hit the other plane, or you're coming in too hard. And then this is where I knew this was the Lord in the dream. Because Pence was looking at Trump kind of like, you may better not do this, because he was trying to go land down here in front of this other plane. And Trump looked at Pence and took his hands up like this off of the wheel and off the control. And he said, it's out of my hands. He said, I'm not controlling it now. He said, it's something else. He said, something else is flying it. He said, I'm not. And I remember Pence then was looking at it like, how is it? It's like, when an airplane gets in autopilot, but it wasn't in autopilot. And he was telling him, because Pence was kind of trying to talk him out, hey, man, just let them land. Let's don't do this. And Trump said, I'm not even doing it. I'm not flying it. What's going on? And the plane zooms in, goes over the top of the other plane. And I'm going to tell you about that plane. It had Biden and Harris's name on the wing. It goes in. Whoo, I feel the Holy Ghost right now, man. And that plane goes in. And when it's going in, I mean, it's like, who's flying this plane? And I'm going to reiterate, he's looking at him like, it's out of my hands now. I'm not doing it. Somebody else is in control of this plane. And that plane goes over the top of the Biden and Harris plane. Air Force One flies right over the top of it. And this is what I want to tell you about it before I get to the end. Is I remember as we were coming to it, seeing the other plane when we come over the top of it, they're landing. And we're going to fly over them and land over them by somebody else that's controlling it. And when we fly over it, the plane that said Biden and Harris on it, it was small. And I remember somebody saying it, said, that's not a real plane. That's a drone, or like that's a remote control. They're not in that plane. They're like, this is not even real. This is a fake plane. It was so little. Have you ever seen what a drone? And we're in a big, whatever Air Force One is, 747. When we flew over the top of it, going over it, it's like, that's a little bitty, it's not even humans in it. I want to interpret it, but I'm not going to tell you, but, take it to God. So, we're flying over that control. They're all against us here. They tried to keep us from landing. I don't want to interpret it, but I'm just going to go ahead. So we land, and when we hit, we're coming in hard. And I remember watching the steering wheel and the gauges, and Trump's not got his hand on any of it. He's sitting there with his hands back, kind of like he's in shock, what is that? And this plane comes in, boom, we hit hard, boom, but we're going way too fast. We come in like a rocket. And so as we're going forward and hit violently, we were all over, we're swaying left to right, and now I hear people in the back of the plane screaming. People are screaming because they know, we're going way too fast to get this plane stopped. We're going to run off the end of the tarmac. And that's exactly what happened. The plane run right off the end. I remember looking and seeing signs and the end of the tarmac. We run right across out into a field. It was just, nothing. Just the tarmac end, and then you just got like a cornfield, but it's just mowed down grass. We're going out in this field and we're sliding, and the plane starts turning to the right. We're sliding, and I'm watching people are screaming in the back, and I'm watching their faces. Trump and Pence are like, what? They knew there's nothing they could do to stop it. They were not in control of it, to land anything. And the plane turned, and I just remember at this point in the dream, I was in it, but it's like I looked above it, and I saw the plane do a 360. It turned completely around. I want to interpret this, but I'm not. I'm just going to tell you that it's like something pulled me up, and I saw the plane blew on top, turning Air Force, and it turned 360 degrees. It turned completely around. It did a spin out, and it's sliding through this field. It's sliding out through the land. Now, I'm just going to tell you what was said, and I'm not going to try to interpret. You already know what I've told you. I'm on record saying it's the will of God for Trump to go back in a second term, but we got to pray. we got to do some things. They're trying to steal it. I'm not going to interpret it because I promised I wouldn't, but listen to me. Something's going to try to stop it from happening. And when Air Force One went into this slide, I heard on the control tower, this is what they said. I wrote it down. I'm going to read it to you. Now, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I'm just telling you my dream. I can't control what I dream. I can control what I interpret. But here's what it said. The control tower started saying, we're sliding. The plane is sliding, did a 360 sliding. And I heard the control tower say, Air Force One is in a landslide. Air Force One is in a landslide in the field and it's out of our control. Let me say that again. They said, Air Force One is in a landslide. Air Force One is in a landslide and in the field and it is out of control. And they said, do not respond and do not report. They said, do not respond and do not report. In other words, they said, they're in a landslide. Now, what could that mean? Do not respond and the plane just come to a stop. And when the door opened, when the doors of the plane opened to look out, and I didn't step out, they stepped out, and I don't know really who opened the door, but when I looked out, I remember Pence looked down and there was a ditch. And Pence told Trump, he said, just a little bit more and we would have flipped. He said they would have flipped us. They would have flipped us. I know when all this is done, this is going to mean something, folks. But he said just a little bit more. He was telling Trump and telling everybody just a little bit. He was calm. Trump was just shaking like, what just happened? And he said just a little bit more, we would have got into that ditch. They would have flipped us. They would have flipped us over. And the thing that shocked me, stood out, and this is about it, is that when the door opened and I was looking out, there was nobody there to meet us. I was thinking ambulances, police cars, the news media would come. And the strangest, most somber part, we were all there and nobody was saying they was there to meet us. And I looked out across and I saw the Biden-Harris plane was tiny and there was an entourage out there. Everybody was there to meet them. But this is what I heard. I remember hearing them say this. Everybody in the plane said that were in the back. It was quiet, calm. We were looking out. Everybody in the plane said, Air Force One. They started shouting, Air Force One, Air Force One, Air Force One. They said, everybody in there, they're like having a party in the plane. They're saying, Air Force One, Air Force One. Now, I'm not going to try to interpret this yet. Does that mean Air Force One? Or does that mean Air Force One? Does that mean Air Force O-N-E, like Air Force One? Or does that mean Air Force One, W-O-N, they won? Does that mean, and does that mean if they win, nobody wants to acknowledge that they landed first, that they got out front, that even though they slid across the land, it was a rough landing. What does it mean? We're going to take it to God in prayer.
Pioneer, pioneer, keep pressing onward beyond your fears. Only the Father goes before you to your own frontier. You're a pioneer. Just lift your hands. Let me declare over you tonight. Pioneer. You're a pioneer. Keep pressing onward. You can't stay here. Only the Father who goes before you to your own frontier. You're a pioneer. You travel light and you travel alone. And when you arrive, nobody knows but your Father Father in heaven, He is glad you can go. 'Cause those who come after you will need the road. You're a pioneer, a pioneer. Keep pressing onward beyond your fears. Only the Father goes before you to your own frontier. You're a pioneer, and what you have done, others will do, bigger and better and faster than you. But you can't look back. You can't look back. You can't look back. You gotta keep on pressing through. There's a wilderness pathway. It's calling you. The Father goes before you. Only your Father goes before you. Only the Father goes before you to your own frontier. You're a pioneer. You're a pioneer. Only the Father goes before you to your own frontier. You're a